Hi, my name is Hanan and I'm partner at Cornerstone Venture Partners. We're a US-Israeli fund focusing mainly on seed investment. And I'd like to talk to you a bit about the status of seed today in Israel. So on the surface level, things look quite well. We're still number one in the world in total dollars per capita, VC money. We're number two in the world in cybersecurity, more than 6,000 companies today in Israel. And multinationals are flocking in. According to Startup Nation Central, 539 multinational companies today are active in Israel, either by R&D centers, investments, partnerships, etc. And in terms of capital, you can see in this graph by IVC, most of the graphs here are from IVC, thank you. You see an increase from less than $3 billion invested in companies to more than almost $6.5 billion invested last year in 2018. But if you look at the graph of the number of deals, you see that we're actually flat. And in this graph that shows where the money goes, you can see that later stages and C rounds actually doubled, as was discussed before. A rounds and B rounds increased by 50%, but only this small part in the bottom line you see in the seed round stayed flat. And last year, only 3.8% of the money invested in Israel went into seed. This graph shows $5 million and under and $20 million and above. And you can see that large rounds of 20 million and above went from 1 billion to more than 4 billion last year. Amount of deals increased from 27 to 100. However, the $5 million and under decreased. The amount of the money invested stayed flat, and the amount of companies raised actually decreased. And I think maybe the most concerning graph that I'm going to show you today is this graph by IVC presented in February that shows a very clear decrease in the amount of companies established every year in Israel. And there's a few reasons to explain why it's happening. You can say that it's just a phase, and a few years ago when mobile and website, it was much easier to create a company than today, where most of the companies are AI and cyber and medical. You can say that there was an inflation of companies a few years ago with accelerators and programs in universities. And you can say that it's actually good. We have less companies, but companies get more funded and close less, so we have a better average quality. But I'd argue that we actually might have a different problem. And as discussed before, the fact that the salaries today is increasing along the way, and international companies are paying almost 40% higher than what Israeli companies are paying, is not only a problem for recruiting. It might change the fact that people have less incentive to create a company. And think about yourself when you're 26, you finish university, you're a genius, and you can start your first job at one of the international companies and get 35,000 shekels. What's your incentive to come and start a startup? And 10 years after, you now have 2 kids, and you have a great salary and a great place to work. What's your incentive to leave this place and to create a company? Now, 10 years ago, tech was better salaries than the average, but it wasn't as big. And I really think that we might have here a problem where we're going to lose our edge and become from a startup nation into another R&D nation with some good startups. And this could be a problem as more companies in the world, more countries are focusing and creating startup nations and pouring money. It's not only about quality. We have great quality, and we discussed that before, but we need also quantity. We need more companies to be established in Israel. So we need to push more Israelis from diverse background, all sectors and geographies to establish companies. We need more investments in the pre-seed and seed. We need to get the angels back in the game. Based on a few numbers, angels are actually leaving the game, maybe because of the inflation in valuations. And we need to create more liquidity options for them, maybe to leave earlier before the big rounds come in. And we need to be more minded in our investments. And this is the way that we evaluate companies at Cornerstone. It's called the team model. It's based on traction, team, technology, and timing. You can also call it market, but then it won't be the team model, so we'll call it timing. And this is how you check it out. The traction, how good is the team, how good is the technology, how good is the market. And when it's a 10, everything is amazing, it's easy. But what happens if it's not a 10? As a seed investor, we cannot only focus on traction, right? Because we invest earlier. There's very limited traction. In terms of team, everyone talks about teams, but there are a lot of founders who are first-timers, who are not from the right geography or coming from different backgrounds. They might have a lack of business acumen, and they're not finding the money. And we're seeing a lot of good companies who have traction, technology, and our seed investors are not investing in them. And in terms of timing and the technology, this is a metric by IVC from a few months ago that shows that 1,121 companies in AI raised $10 billion in the last decade. And I'll ask, do we really have 1,100 AI companies? I'm not sure. I think we have maybe 1,100 companies who have AI in their presentation. And as you can see in this quote by Matt Veloso from Microsoft, the difference between machine learning and AI is if it's written in Python, it's probably machine learning. If it's written in PowerPoint, it's probably AI. And I think it's a bit our fault, because when I ask founders, why do you include AI? You don't have it. You don't have a data scientist. It's in your roadmap. He says, we think that investors won't invest in us if we don't have AI in our presentation. And another reason that a lot of startups are getting rejected is, can it be a billion-dollar company, right? Did you get this response from founders? But let's be realistic. We talked about unicorns before. Only 2% of companies sold last year were above $500 million. 54% were companies that were sold under 50 million. Is it a failure? Well, maybe. But for most founders, it was a very successful exit. For most angels and seed investors, it was a good exit. And just to sum things up, I think the pain is we're not profits, unfortunately. We don't know how to predict the future. We don't know what market will grow and what market will decline. Even when I invest in companies, I have no idea if this is going to be a unicorn, or maybe the team will need to change before we go into later stages. But what I do know that currently we need more founders to join the game from diverse backgrounds. We need more companies in order to keep the edge of the startup nation. Thank you.